Welcome everybody. My name is Adam Hans-Jones, and for those who are not familiar with me, I work for Arrow ECS in Sweden. My main purpose at Arrow is to work with the business development of Oracle. And why we're here today is because Gunilla and Christian from ATEA, together with MySQL, Archie and Peter and myself have put together a telemarketing activity where we are currently, the telemarketing agency is currently calling on prospects to set up meetings for you guys in order to prospect some MySQL customers. And the session today is going to be held by Archie, who will get the chance to introduce himself fairly soon. And go into a second part where his colleague Peter Ram will take over and take some questions in Swedish and just fill in some minor and major details regarding the Swedish market and how you can handle this when you actually get into speaking with the prospect. Archie, you can take the stage.
I can take the stage? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Adam. And can everybody hear me okay, first of all? I'm getting some feedback, and I'm hoping it's not my PC. Would everyone mind going on mute so that we don't get too much feedback? That's much better. Right. So my name's Archie Dhaliwal. I head up the indirect business for MySQL in Northern Europe. What that means is basically anything which is not direct for MySQL business in Northern Europe, I'm responsible for and I get measured against. I have my colleague Peter Ram on the call today. He's a Swedish fella who's based out of Dublin, and he looks after the embedded business for MySQL. So it's the stuff that your ISVs, your software partners who create their own applications, he looks after that sort of side of the business primarily. But he's also going to assist me today with any questions you may have in Swedish. Since Peter is a native Swede, he can answer those. So I've got a few slides I'm going to go through today. It's going to take between 45 minutes and an hour. Please, if I'm talking too fast, if you misunderstand something, if you have any questions, let's keep this informal. Either put something on chat or interrupt me and ask me a question. I really would prefer interaction, so that, you know, this training is not for me, it's for you. It's so that you understand MySQL and you can go forward and talk to your customers and give them the service they require, and hopefully make some money at the same time for yourselves. So this is your training. I really encourage you to keep it informal and ask me any questions you like. So with that, Peter, I don't know if you just want to say hello, or shall I just crack on?
I'll introduce myself properly, but in Swedish later when I start to come with a little bit of feedback on my take on the Nordic market. So go ahead, Archie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Okay. So, right. Here we go. So, MySQL is an Oracle company, and so if you've ever seen any Oracle presentations before, you'll see the safe harbor statement. This is to really protect us from being sued by you, because I get rather excited when I talk about MySQL, and I don't want my excitement to mean that you go out and rush out and buy shares in Oracle, thinking that because of the MySQL business, you'll make money on Oracle. You may do, but there's no guarantee. And any investment decision or any financial decisions you make are your decisions, not mine. Okay, so that's what the safe harbor statement is there for. Right. My colleagues, please interrupt me if you see any chats in the chat box if I don't notice them. So MySQL AB started 25 years ago. We have just had our 25th year birthday anniversary last month in May. So yeah, MySQL is 25 years old. MySQL is only a database. I'm sorry, it's nothing sexy, it's nothing exciting, it's just a database. About 15 years ago, we introduced something called InnoDB. InnoDB is a database engine. When MySQL first started, it started with MyISAM as the database engine. About 15 years ago, we introduced InnoDB. Why does that matter? Well, InnoDB is a much more secure database engine than MyISAM. Basically, in simple terms, what that means is when you put data in the database, you're guaranteed that the data is there. You don't want to be putting data in a database and it disappearing. That's what the InnoDB gives you. It gives you ACID compliancy. Now, 12 years ago, MySQL AB was acquired by Sun Microsystems. And about 10 years ago, Oracle acquired Sun. Now, Oracle did not go out into the market to look for an open source database. They did not go into the market looking to buy MySQL. They went into the market to buy Sun Microsystems. And as they acquired Sun Microsystems, they were given MySQL as part of the package. Now, everyone said that when Oracle had acquired MySQL some 10 years ago, MySQL would be dead. It would be killed off. This is not true. The complete opposite has happened. Since Oracle has acquired Sun Microsystems and MySQL, they have invested in MySQL. There's been a lot more innovation in MySQL, but we are still an open source database. We are on the opposite side of the spectrum from Oracle. Oracle is a proprietary database. MySQL is an open source database. We couldn't be more different if we tried. Okay, so DB Engines is a website that tracks database systems and activity and communications related to databases. So whether there's anyone mentioning databases on a website, if there's any kind of general interest sort of blogs about databases, any technical discussions, any vacancies, anything related to databases, it's tracking that. And they put out this table every single month. And okay, this particular table is a few months old, but nevertheless, what it shows is quite consistent. There's more talk on websites about MySQL than any other database. Sorry, on Oracle than any other database. And MySQL is number 2, and Microsoft SQL Server is number 3. And that's been quite consistent for a couple of years at least now. But what's more interesting is if you look at the numbers for the top 3 databases, they are significantly higher than the rest. Basically, those top 3 databases account for around 90% of the database market. 90%. So it's 30, 30, 30. And the rest of the databases, so that's number 4 onwards, take care of about the other 10% of database products in the world. What's interesting also is in the top 3, MySQL is the only open source database. Oracle and Microsoft SQL Server are proprietary. They are not open source. Last year, DB Engines actually nominated MySQL as their database of the year. So they compared it to Oracle, Microsoft, Postgres, Mongo, IBM, DB2, all of them. And they believed that MySQL was the best database in their opinion. Stack Overflow is very popular with developers. So when developers are looking for advice or guidance, they normally go to Stack Overflow to talk to other developers. And Stack Overflow did a survey of developers to ask them what was the most commonly used database that they use. And MySQL came in as number 1 with 54%. What's interesting there is if you look at Oracle, that was only 16.5%. Please note, we're talking developers. All right, so we're not saying which database are they using under all of their applications. They're talking about when they're developing, what is the database they consider most popular. And MySQL, 54%, number one. JetBrains, similar sort of survey, asking developers, what database do you select when you're developing new applications? In their survey, MySQL came in at 60%. Any questions on that? Okay. Well, MySQL is just for websites, right? So is there any surprise? Not really. Actually, MySQL is for a lot more than just websites. If you look at the social media giants, you've got Facebook, which has something like 2.5 billion users, maybe a few more. You've got Twitter, which is something in the region of 300 million users. They use MySQL as their underlying database. So if somebody's talking about scale, if they're talking about size, number of users, number of database lines, or size of databases, the question is, are they bigger than Facebook? Are they bigger than Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn? Probably not. So we can scale. E-commerce, yeah, this is all about sort of handling bookings and orders. Booking.com do over 2 billion events per day. That is 2 billion lines are being written on the database per day, or are being read per day from the database. FinTech, finance, credit card authorizations. Most organizations use MySQL as their underlying database for credit card authorizations. Fortune companies, if we look at Sky have something called a Sky Q box here in the UK and many European countries. This is a satellite TV company for multimedia streaming. And with the Sky Q box, there is some data, if you call it IoT data, information about the box, which is being fed back to Sky by every single Sky Q box. They are writing something like 800 million lines into their database every single day. They're deleting about 600 million lines per day. The database now is already over 17 terabytes. What this basically means is if you have a problem with your Sky Q box and you call Sky, the customer service operator, when he's talking to you or she's talking to you, they're actually looking at the telemetry and the data which is being fed back by the box automatically to confirm that the issues you are having are indeed problems with the box and not with user error. If you look at telcos, more than 95% of the world's mobile communications are managed by MySQL databases as the underlying database. They basically will identify your telephone, so your IMEI number. They identify where you are and where you're calling. And they work out basically what the billing needs to be for that communication between you and somebody else before they connect you. So this is many connections to the database. We're talking hundreds of thousands, which need to happen lightning fast. So this is a MySQL database, which is an in-memory database, which is lightning fast. But that data is guaranteed to be on the database. When we look at governments, in the UK, we have the tax office. It's known as Her Majesty's Revenues and Customs, HMRC. More than 800 billion pounds of revenues are collected from customs alone within HMRC. They use MySQL as the underlying database for many of the microservices for national infrastructure projects. These are applications that cannot go down. If they go down, you will hear about this in the world news because there will be many problems with the supply chain and goods being imported and exported. The next one is the India flag. There's more than 1.2 billion citizens in India, and they all have a national ID card. And all that data is managed in MySQL. And if we just look at the far right, that's the Swedish police. You might recognize the logo. The Swedish police use MySQL for front, middle, and back office. They have more than 150 servers, which are all virtualized. So they probably are running 300-400 databases of MySQL. And then the last one is software as a service. I'm sure you've all heard of GitHub. If anyone is downloading information from GitHub, or if they're using Workday, which is a software as a service product, you're actually using MySQL as the underlying database. So in summary, MySQL is not used just for websites. It's used by many industries, virtually all industries, and you are probably touching MySQL every single day. You may not even know it, but the underlying database for many of the things you do on a day-to-day basis is MySQL. So it's very popular indeed. Data, right? Data is the new oil. More and more data is being collected by IT systems. At the moment, we're sitting around 45, 50 zettabytes. And by 2025, we're talking about 175 zettabytes. That's a lot of data. And it's going to be, the growth of the data is just so great in the next 5 years. Where's all that data going to be going? It's going to be going onto databases. It needs to be stored somewhere. So just bear that in mind. So, lots of data and data growing. What are CIOs thinking of? So what are the people responsible for ensuring their businesses are ready to handle tomorrow's requirements? What are they thinking of? Well, they're thinking of security. When you're dealing with data, you need good security. You need good skills, the talent, the ability of the people within your organization to work with the technologies that you're introducing to your business. Digital transformation. Okay, what does that mean? It basically means in the past, we may have filled in forms, sent forms in the post, gone and spoken to people. A lot of this is now becoming digital, self-service. You're able to actually go and tell the council that the street light in your street is not working. You do it by actually going onto a website and filling in a web form. It's all becoming mobile. It's all becoming digital. And then we're talking about all this data we're collecting. But the data is the new oil, right? It's only the new oil if you can analyze the data, if you can make sense of the data. And so analytics, BI, AI is becoming very, very popular indeed. And last but not least, in the top 5 of the top 10 is cloud. Do I look after my own infrastructure, or do I use a public cloud so somebody else looks after the infrastructure? So out of the top 5, the top 4 touch on MySQL. So looking at databases now, databases on-premise are growing around 20% every decade. It's worth about $46 billion and growing. However, the databases in cloud, in public clouds, is currently only 10 billion, but it's growing around 70%. So database market is going to be moving towards the cloud much faster than on-premise. So in other words, if your customers are talking about moving to cloud, that's good. They still need a database. As I highlighted with the CIOs, the number one most important thing they think about is security. Why? Well, within the data, there is much information in there that is personal, that is secret, that is confidential. Payment card information, your date of birth, your email address, your passwords, and so on. There's a lot of data there which you do not want to be compromised. You do not want those organizations to lose your data because it will be extremely embarrassing and disruptive. So you've got to ensure that the organizations are looking after your data properly. Here's a few examples that you may have come across because these have been fairly big breaches of data. Interestingly there, Capital One was a data hack from a public cloud. It was from AWS, where a consultant who was a contractor actually compromised the data. So where you use a public cloud and you ask them to manage your database as a service, you must be careful about the quality of the controls and security. So how do we protect our data? Well, governments have introduced lots of legislation, lots of laws, lots of regulation, governance, compliance. Everyone in EMEA has come across GDPR, for example, as a way of protecting personally identifiable information. But there's many other regulations and laws. There's PCI DSS, which is related to payment card industry, digital service standard, HIPAA for health, and so on. So let's look at a use case here. We have a company in California which has its own data protection regulations that it needs to comply with within California, but they're trading with Europe. So they also need to comply with GDPR. And because it's related to credit cards, they also need to comply with PCI DSS. All of these sort of standards are related to the security controls and features within the database. In the case of GDPR, it's actually a business process, but there are many technical aspects of GDPR which you require your database to manage. And MySQL can manage a lot of the technical aspects. We have encryption. We can hide your data. So from a development point of view, you can use data which is unidentifiable. It's been masked. So you can actually test your applications. You're not using live data. You're not using data of real human beings, because then that would compromise security. There's authentication, there's firewalls, and so on. There are many, many features within MySQL Enterprise Edition to protect your data. So let's look at this a bit more carefully. So within MySQL Enterprise Edition, we're talking about many, many advanced features that help you to scale, ensure that your database is always on. In other words, highly available. Authentication, basically being able to log on to the database, whether you're using your LDAP or PAM, which are your logon credentials for your other applications. Audit, who did what when. Encryption, TDE stands for transparent data encryption. And in the case of MySQL, when we talk about firewall, what we're talking about there is the information we want to get from the database, the queries we are going to ask the database are actually queries that we recognize. So if Adam asks or Peter asks a question to the database that is not a recognized question, the database doesn't answer. This is what, so firewall will avoid SQL ingestions, where you're querying the database, give me all the information, drop database, stuff that it doesn't recognize, it will not deliver answers to. Then you have management tools. Have you ever driven a car without a dashboard? Pretty difficult. You won't know how fast you're going. You won't know how much fuel you have. You won't know if you indicate whether or not you're actually, the indicators are working or the lights are working. Well, monitoring for databases are just as important. And MySQL has its own enterprise monitor with more than 250 advisories, basically scripts, which will alert the user, alert the database administrator to any issues with the database. We have enterprise backup, which basically means you can back up your data and you can confirm the backup is a good backup. So if you ever need to restore from the backup, you know with certainty that that backup will give you your data back. There's a checksum, it checks the backup is correct. It also allows you to do the backup real time. So you don't need to stop your database when you're doing the backup. For developers, there are many tools like monitoring which will help them to actually look at the performance of the database based on the code that they are doing. So developers are forever saying the database is the problem. It could be their code is the problem. And the tools within MySQL Enterprise Edition will actually highlight how whatever they introduce and when they connect to the database, whether they're writing with good quality code or bad code. And for database administrators, because you have all the alerts and all the actual information and the enterprise backup, it makes their life a lot easier and a lot quicker. Migration as well. Now, at this stage, I should highlight that MySQL Enterprise Edition is a commercial version of MySQL. It is not the free version, and that's why you get the advanced features and the management tools, but you also get support, and it's what you would expect. So if you have a technical problem with your database, you can log a call, and you actually log a call on the same Oracle support portal that you would use for Oracle support. And we also adhere to the same service level agreements for a level 1, 2, 3, and 4. In other words, we actually sign up to an SLA of how quickly we will respond. But in addition to support, which is when you have a technical problem, we also offer consultative support. Well, what we mean here is the database is fine, but you need some consultancy type questions answered. So rather than go out and pay money for that, you can ask us and we will answer your questions. It could be around optimizing your database. It could be around backup strategies. It could be around anything you would like to ask. And it's unlimited. You can ask us many questions as you like. In addition to that also, you get Oracle certifications. We believe between 70 and 80% of MySQL users also have Oracle. Now, Oracle is very expensive, and you need to pay extra for a lot of their management tools. They have Oracle Enterprise Monitor. They have a backup vault. They have a key vault for encryption to look after the keys. They have Golden Gate for migration. Well, if you've bought MySQL Enterprise Edition, you are licensed to integrate with those tools. So you can maximize your investment that you've made with MySQL and Oracle. All make sense? So the question I have when I'm positioning MySQL to an organization, so this is what I would encourage you guys to do, is when you're talking to your customers, the very first question you need to ask is, are you building or are you buying? Are you building or are you buying? What do you mean? Am I building or buying? Well, are you buying applications or are you building? Now, if you're buying applications, that's basically meaning you're buying commercially off-the-shelf COTS applications. So these are applications such as ERPs, HCM, CRM, SCM, finance, warehouse, and they have many, many applications out there which you can go and buy. And the reason you're buying these applications is because it doesn't make a lot of sense to build your own for those use cases, because there's so much choice in the market. So the next question should be, if you're buying, does the application support MySQL? If the answer is no, it doesn't support MySQL, then MySQL is not the answer. Move on. No point continuing to talk to the customer about MySQL in relation to supporting those applications, those COTS applications. So if the customer is building, and every organization you deal with will be building software as well as buying software. The question is, what is the percentage that they are building compared to what they are buying? And because MySQL was originally started in Sweden, MySQL AB, I will argue that virtually every organization you speak to will either be using MySQL or would have heard of MySQL. So MySQL is open source, and you will ask the question, are you using open source software? Very important question. And if they are using open source questions, sorry, Archie, questions allowed. Is there a question, Chris?
Oh, you better believe it. Hello. Sorry, I had some trouble joining. Good tempo. Listen, the question, how do we know if the COTS application supports MySQL or not? How do we find out? What's the path?
Ask the customer.
Right, then it's always the same. And what if the customer doesn't know? Because the customer are running something else than MySQL, and they might want to find out. Could we move to this?
Okay. Then come to me. That's a great question, and I wouldn't expect anything else from you, Kristen. So ask me, and let us do the investigation for you, because there are so many applications out there that do support MySQL. Then I would say ask me the question. And let us investigate it on a use case basis. The danger is, it's almost like how many fish in the sea are yellow or blue. You won't know because there's so many different kinds of fish. So rather than trying to do a complete audit of the entire ocean to try to find every blue fish and what species it is, would mean we'll be chasing our tails for years and years. And I'd rather go and talk to the customers.
Yeah, I get that. And I think that if we can have a dialogue like that with the customer, we can find out, then I think that's a quality lead. But I'll stop there. Thanks for the answer, Archie.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So those are applications they've bought, right? So COTS applications. But I would argue that they'll also be building lots of applications. And I'll also say that when they are building applications, one of their biggest expenses is going to be the software licenses. So before they even write one line of code, they need to buy software licenses. And if they're using Oracle, if they're using Microsoft SQL Server or Sybase or DB2, they're going to be paying a lot of money for the software before they even write one line of code. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the customer will be what's called vendor lock-in. They will be locked in if they are using a proprietary database. In other words, once the application has been written and it's gone into production, the vendor can charge you what they like. They can put the price up and the customer has to pay. They have no choice. The third thing, if you upgrade your hardware, your servers, your infrastructure, so you increase the number of cores, or you want to run your software in virtualized environments, VMs, you will know that licensing in those scenarios can be very expensive and a headache. With MySQL, you do not need to have a hard partition or a partial partition. You need no partition when you're running VMs with MySQL. So you can have a virtual server farm with 1,000 VMs and you only need 50 MySQL databases. You can put them where you like. You're not constrained. Budget. Every customer is now going to be looking at what they are spending, how much money they are spending on their applications. The first question they're going to ask is, do we still need this application post-COVID-19? And if the answer is yes, they're going to say, well, how much is it going to cost us? Can we reduce the cost? Now, they can come back to ATEA and say, hey, go back to your suppliers and try to reduce the cost. And yeah, that might work. You might get 2 or 3 points off. But that isn't going to be significant savings. Whereas if they move to open source, if they move to MySQL Enterprise Edition, compared to Microsoft SQL Server, for example, they could be looking at savings in the region of 90%. 90%. So a significant saving compared to what they're paying for proprietary databases. So bear that in mind. The other thing I mentioned already here now is vendor lock-in, avoiding vendor lock-in. Why are we going to avoid vendor lock-in? Well, you want to be the good guys, right? You want to be the customer's friend. You want to be recommending something where you can, and even where you can't recommend something, you want to make sure that the customer is not caught in a trap where they've gone down a road and they can't get out of that road. If they've got that experience and you can show empathy, if you can show compassion for the pain that they've had in the past, they're more likely to listen to you if you have a solution to avoid that in the future. Now, in this scenario, what we're talking about is MySQL, right? And MySQL has a free version called the Community Edition. So say you're talking to a customer who's running the Community Edition and you convince them to buy the Enterprise Edition. Great. But after a year, they're thinking, do I still need the Enterprise Edition? Well, the Enterprise Edition gives them backup and monitor, which is really, really cool stuff, and it means it saves them a lot of time. It means it gives the database administrators more time to do more things for less time. So you need less staff to do more work. It protects your data because you've got transparent data encryption. You've got all these other cool things like Oracle certification, so you can connect to Oracle management tools, and much, much more. That's what you're getting with MySQL Enterprise Edition. And the customer goes, yeah, I get all that, but I'm not using any of it and I don't want it anymore. Okay, that's cool. In that case, Mr. Customer, if you don't want to continue with MySQL Enterprise Edition, all you need to do is stop the database. Run those little commands I've put in a slightly different color. Make sure you've taken a backup, because you don't want to tempt fate. You don't want a situation that something goes wrong and your data gets all messed up. You uninstall the MySQL Enterprise binaries and you install the community binaries, making sure you're using the same version, and then you go and start your database. You've not needed to change one line of code in your application. And now you are running the community version, not the enterprise version. There has been no lock-in from MySQL. The customer is free to choose. Obviously, if they move away from enterprise onto community and they're having any challenges, any problems, then the DBAs will be going to the likes of Google or Stack Overflow to ask for advice and guidance, because when they have a problem, they can't come to us anymore. And that's going to take them much more time. And the advice that they will get from these blogs and these forums won't always be the correct advice. And is that going to cause them to create an even bigger problem than they already have? And they also will no longer have any influence on us to either fix bugs or make enhancements to the database. And don't forget, now backups and restores, you won't be able to use enterprise backup. You'll need to do SQL dumps and all this sort of stuff. You'll need to sort out your own logging credentials. You can no longer use the integrations into Active Directory and what have you. You'd need to use the community version of encryption. You won't have access to the enterprise version. So that's almost like saying I'm locking my house and I'm leaving the key for the house under the mat at the front door. In other words, if someone steals a disk, the key to unencrypt the disk is on the disk. How crazy is that? But it's true. That's what you get with community, not with enterprise. You'll now be driving a car with no dashboard. All this for 47,800 krona a year. If something goes wrong, is it worth more than 47,800? Roughly $5,000 per year. That $5,000 per year has not changed for many, many years. The other thing to look out for is forks. What's a fork? And what's a proprietary cloud solution? Okay. MySQL is open source. So many companies out there are taking MySQL and they are recompiling MySQL with their own enhancements. They're changing the code. And then it's becoming Archie's SQL or Christian's SQL database. And Christian can sell you support for Christian's SQL database. It's no longer Oracle MySQL. It isn't the database which has been used by more than 50 million organizations around the world. 50 million, 50 million. So what does this mean? It means when Oracle MySQL make enhancements to the database, when they make improvements to the database, those improvements will not be on Christian's database. They will only be on the Oracle MySQL database. When will Christian introduce those enhancements? That's up to Christian, not up to us. We will not support Christian's database. We only support Oracle MySQL. So the roadmap, the IP, the vision, the marketing, and all the features that we talk about are for Oracle MySQL. But you'll have many organizations out there that will talk about MySQL and will give you the impression that they are dealing with Oracle MySQL. Let's look at this a bit closer. So you have in the cloud, you have managed services, database as a service. AWS has got something called RDS, which is their database as a service. And if you look at AWS promoting MySQL, they talk about MySQL version 5.5 and MySQL version 8. They never suggest that AWS RDS is a fork. In other words, it is an Oracle MySQL. They shouldn't call it MySQL because it's not MySQL. It's AWS's version of MySQL. Now, we have many people around the world giving ideas and information back to us and suggestions for us to enhance our database. AWS is never offering us any information on what we should do to our database. They're just taking. Now, if you go to AWS RDS, when are you going to get a patch? When are you going to get a backup? How are you going to be supported on that database? You need to rely on AWS. You can no longer come to us. And the same applies to Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud. And we also put MariaDB there. MariaDB started 10 years ago when MySQL was acquired by Oracle. And when they said Oracle were going to kill MySQL. Now, more recently, MariaDB decided they want to compete with Oracle, and therefore they have now gone in an opposite development path to MySQL. So their database is not compatible with MySQL. You cannot say that MariaDB is also MySQL. The number of users that use MariaDB is a fraction of those that are using Oracle MySQL. So when you're talking to customers, and if they mention some of these names, they're forks. And so it gives you something you can talk about when you're talking to them. So what are we saying here? We're saying we're not saying don't go to cloud because, hey, nearly 70% of the growth is in the cloud for databases. What we're saying is buy infrastructure as a service rather than platform as a service so that you can manage your database yourself. You have all the security and all the control and the support from Oracle MySQL. Furthermore, if you ever choose to leave the cloud, so if you ever leave AWS and say, I'm going to Azure, because you're managing the database yourself, you will need to do much less enhancements or modifications to your application. So here, I have a white paper for this. We're just giving an example. So within AWS, if you're buying infrastructure as a service, you're buying EC2. If you're buying database as a service, you're buying RDS. And as you can see here, there's many things here that EC2 will give you, because you're bringing your own database. They're only providing the infrastructure that you would not have if you buy RDS. And some of the most important ones will be around backup and around patching. Yes, they do backups in RDS, but are those backups secure? What if they back up a bad block? Do you know? Do they know? When will you know? Is it when you need that backup to restore that you realize, oh, damn, that backup is no good? There is no checksum. There is no control to confirm that that's a good backup. How often can they do the backup? Do they back up your data as often as you need to? Like you want it continually backed up, for example. Can they handle that? What about patching? How do they patch the database? Because MySQL, just like any other software, requires patching, requires enhancements. How do they manage that? So this is what you've been waiting for, right? Licensing. This is all great, but how much does it cost? So let's look at physical servers first. A physical server, a box. The question is, how many sockets, how many CPUs in that physical server? It has 2 sockets, has 3 sockets. Anything up to 4 sockets or 4 CPUs in that physical server will cost 47,800 krona per year. The $5,000 has not changed for more than 9 years. If the server is a big server and it has more than 4 sockets, so it's got five sockets or 6 or 8 sockets, then it's only costing you 95,600 krona per year. These are list price, by the way. So it's not a lot of money. We don't care how many cores. It's unlimited cores. Unlimited number of sockets in a way, because it doesn't matter if it's 1 socket or 4 sockets, the price is fixed. And if it's 5+ sockets, the price is fixed. So you could have 100 sockets and it will still be 95,600. What we say though is within your application, in your test, dev, and production environments and pre-production environments, you need to buy the same licenses. So you cannot say, okay, I'm only going to run one MySQL enterprise license for, say, 47,000, and I'll run the rest as community. That doesn't work. You need to ensure they are all the same enterprise licenses, if that's the way your customer wishes to go. So let's look at just what that really means in real terms. Now, this is list price versus list price, and we're comparing MySQL Enterprise Edition with Microsoft SQL Server over a 3-year period for 4 servers, 4 boxes. Each box, each server, physical box has 4 sockets, and each socket has 8 cores. So we are talking about 32 cores per box. 32 times 4, 128 cores per year over a 3-year period. Now in dollars, that would cost $60,000 for MySQL over 3 years. For SQL Server Enterprise Edition, and it's got to be Enterprise Edition because that compares to MySQL Enterprise Edition. They are very similar in features. It's $1.6 million. 96% difference between the two. 96%. So the customer says, I get a good discount from Microsoft. They give me 50% off the list price. Great. You're still 46% more than the standard price of MySQL. Actually, we give you a discount. We give you 30% off. As an OPN member, when you resell MySQL, you get 30% discount for any MySQL sales up to $250,000. If it's more than $250,000, then you are getting 35% off. So I would argue where customers are looking to save money, this will move the needle. And with the money they're saving on MySQL, they can use to buy other things from ATEA, servers, other software, other services that you offer. So this could open the door for you to have that conversation. But customers are not using physical servers nowadays, right? They're running VMs. Who runs physicals? Very few customers. And this is where it becomes complicated when you're talking about licensing Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle, because they ask, how many VMs do you have? And you need to license a lot, or you need to create a hard partition so that we know you are limited on the number of VMs you can have. Well, this is not how Oracle MySQL work. MySQL is a completely separate global business unit within Oracle. We make the rules. Oracle don't make our rules. We make our own rules. And our rules are different to Oracle's rules. So 1 to 4 physical sockets, yeah, is the equivalent to 1 to 16 virtual CPUs, vCPUs. And the cost for that, 47,800. And you can put that VM wherever you like. I don't care. And if it's a bigger virtual machine, so it's 17 vCPUs plus, then it's 95,600. One thing I ask, when you're running VMs, some people run big VMs, you know, say a 32 vCPU VM, and they'll put 3 MySQL databases on that one VM. In that situation, they need to buy 3 MySQL licenses, not 1, because it's 1 license per VM. And of course, you need to license all your environments the same. So let's have a look at this. The great thing about privately hosted environments is you have a choice. You can license the virtual machines that you need, or you can license the physical hosts that underpin your virtual farm, your VM farm, okay? So in this example, we have 20 VMs, right? 20 virtual machines. 6 of the 20 run MySQL over 4 physical boxes. So I have a choice now, right? I can either license the 6 VMs, or I can license the 4 physicals. Obviously, I'm going to license the 4 physicals because it's cheaper. Make sense? If your customer is using the public cloud, then obviously you don't have a choice of licensing the underlying physicals. Even if they're using bare metal in a public cloud, they still need to license the virtual machines. And it's the same calculation, 1 to 16 vCPUs or 17 plus vCPUs. Okay? As I said before, if the customer is using database as a service, you know, a managed service on AWS or on Microsoft or on Google, don't come to us. We will not provide support for RDS or managed service. It has to be infrastructure as a service. When we're talking VMs, if we're talking in fact, when we're talking VMs, we have to get approvals because they're non-standard licenses. But I would ask you to come and talk to me because if you're talking customer only wants 3 VMs, then we need to look at whether or not it's worth going through the paperwork. But that's something which I can discuss with you. Is there any questions on that? Because the licensing is normally an important topic for everyone when they're discussing with your customers. Does that make sense? It's pretty straightforward, right? Okay, so let's
and Archie, even though it's pretty straightforward, yes, they can rely on help from all of us in case there is a dialogue 100%. About this.
Absolutely. Now, I'm not an expert, but I'd like to think I'm an expert on MySQL. I am an expert when it comes to commercial discussions on MySQL. Don't ask me to build you a MySQL database. That's not my space. That's for some engineer or some techie. But if you're looking to sell MySQL, then you can certainly come to me. I live and breathe MySQL every single day. This is all I do. And MySQL is very simple. It's not Oracle. I'm not talking about 15,000 products here. I'm talking about two different types of MySQL database. We have the InnoDB engine and we have the NDB engine. The NDB engine is used for telcos and for trading or gaming. The MySQL InnoDB engine is used as the direct comparison to SQL Server Enterprise Edition, and everybody uses it. Come to me if you've got any questions, anything at all related to trying to sell MySQL, and I'll certainly be able to answer it, or Peter will, or Christian. I'm sure you can no doubt answer some of those questions, but also come to us as well. So let's just look at this. Obviously, what is the main driver for MySQL? It's cost. No question about it. It's cost. We are a fraction of the price of a proprietary database, and we don't force the customer to stay with us. There is no vendor lock-in. So the question is, do you build your own applications? Yeah, I build 40% of my own applications. Okay, out of those 40%, if MySQL can address 20%, that's a 20% drop, which is a 50% of the applications they develop. So that's a significant saving to the customer. Are those applications mission critical? Yes. So why are you using community? Well, what do you mean? Well, my friend there, Peter, he takes care of problems if there's any problems. Okay, but what if Peter's on holiday? Who's going to fix your database? Who's going to fix your application? The cost of support is so little that they think because it's called Oracle MySQL, it's going to be very expensive. It's not. And if they're in a regulated industry, so if they're a utility, if they're in finance, if they're in health, if they're a government organization, then they need to meet regulatory compliance. In fact, if they handle personal information, they can be in any industry. They're going to have to be GDPR compliant and so on. So in those scenarios, are they using the Enterprise Edition? No, they're using Community. Well, then they're running at risk. And is it worth it? Because if their data gets compromised, they will get fined bigger than if they're using controlled software, commercial, professional software, which is what MySQL Enterprise Edition is. If they are using the free version and they're not compliant, they don't need to care about compliancy. The question is, how are they getting on with backups? Yeah, the backups are taking us hours and hours. Well, have they considered using enterprise backup? It's much, much faster. What about security? What about monitoring, driving without a dashboard? These will be issues they are having and they're facing. You will also find is they need more staff, or the staff they have need to put in more hours to manage the databases, the free databases. So they think they're saving money because it's free, but then it's costing them more money because of the time they spend to keep that free database functioning properly. So it's a false economy. It's not always a clever way of doing things. If they have Oracle software, then you can integrate with the Oracle software, so you can maximize your investment. Any questions? Here's my contact details. Thank you.
Archie, sorry, Chris here.
Christian, yes.
Yeah, I hope I'm not monopolizing the questions. I'm betting on someone else is going to ask a question. But now, knowing you're a salesperson out through and through, what would you say is like the common objections once you got a good pitch going and the customer says, well, no, but you fill in the blank. Can you give us like one or two kind of normal objections? Yes. And more importantly, how you get around it?
Okay. So the most common objection you're going to have in Sweden is, I don't pay for my database. I don't pay for MySQL, it's free. That's going to be the most common objection you're going to get. And I would argue, all right, what is that database doing? Is it important, the application that the database is storing the data for? Yeah, it is very important. Great. So what do you do if you have a problem? how do you make sure that the database is back up again? And what about the data that you're managing? Because if it's in a regulated industry, then what we're talking about here is a small cost as an insurance policy to avoid the risk. The other big thing will be, in addition to the backups and managing the database, will be if they're using Oracle. Because if you can imagine this, you're sitting at your control center, your desk, and you have this massive screen in front of you, and you have all your Oracle databases on that control desk that you can see the health of. And that's what's telling you, okay, I can see what's going on with my Oracle databases. However, when it comes to the MySQL databases, you need to go to a different screen to look at the MySQL databases. That's taking time. That may require two different people. That's introducing even more cost. If they could now control their MySQL databases on the same dashboard, that same control center as they're managing their Oracle databases, they are suddenly saving a lot of time and hassle. It will actually mean it frees up more time and makes them run more efficiently. So those are the type of rebuttals I would give in those situations to highlight the benefits of the Enterprise Edition. Also, if they're continually developing applications, this is a real life scenario with the UK government, where they have a policy where they should not be buying the Enterprise Edition for pre-production. They should only be buying MySQL for a production database, the Enterprise Edition. Well, they have deadlines. Brexit is at the end of this year. It ain't moving, and they've got to have the systems in place. That means the developers are working crazy hours, almost 24/7 in shifts, to finish the applications they need within the deadlines that have been assigned to them. Guess what? If they use the community version, they do not know if their development code is going to run properly on the database until it's in pre-production, where they can actually look at the stats and the monitoring before it goes into production. And at that point, it's thrown back, saying it's not good, it needs changes. In other words, the development life cycle is extended. It's taking them a lot longer to actually complete their development. And so for that reason, they use MySQL in pre-production and in development to save time. And saving time is saving money, because people cost money as well. The other thing to bear in mind are versions. I didn't mention this earlier. It's important to ask what version the customer is running of MySQL, even if it's community. Because if they're running anything which is version 5.5 or less, they are running at risk, because there is no updates for version 5.5 or less. And there are known security flaws. If they're running version 5.6, they're probably running 5.645, 5.6.45. That's the very latest version of MySQL 5.6. That will be end of support in less than 1 year. In fact, in 6 months, 6-7 months from now, February next year. No more software updates. None. Zero. They are running at risk. If they've not already upgraded and they're not planning an upgrade, they're running out of time. So really, they should be running on 5.7 or 8.0. Any other questions?
No, great answers. I'll stop there. Thank you very much for that.
No problem. Christian, I don't mind you asking, because maybe your colleagues are a bit shy. So, they like you asking your questions because you're helping them indirectly. So if you have any other questions your colleagues have asked you, please ask me. So maybe I'll ask a question. What would be the messaging that, what are the low-hanging fruit? Which are the industries that maybe we should be tackling first? And that's a question to everybody. Which industries do you think MySQL would be most appropriate to sell to right now?
I would say, Archie, like one interesting thing here, it would be for the people at ATEA now, the inside sales team, is when you speak to any of your customer, no matter what industry, what person do you speak to usually? Do you speak to the techie? Do you speak to the procurement? Or do you speak to the IT manager?
Okay, I would avoid talking to the DBA. The techie, the
but
DBA.
Archie. So like, question to the ATEA people. Who do you usually speak to? Stefan,
Oh,
Chris,
right, forgive me.
Gunilla,
Okay.
anyone? Who do you speak to? What's your main contact person? Someone. Go unmute and please answer or come up with something.
It's Gunilla. I would say we definitely don't talk to DBAs. We probably talk to the license managers or maybe someone at C-level. But our main contact is the one handling software.
So most likely you won't run into technical discussions or functional. So it's about licensing, compliance, following GDPR, and our main selling reason, money.
If you're talking to the licensing manager, I'm sure they're already talking to you before you're talking to them to say, do something with these costs. You need to drop your costs.
Yeah.
This is too expensive.
And
we can't afford it.
My experience, well, no, I just continue in English because you're here, Archie, because we're having good dialogue. My 24 years or experience of sales or whatever it is your job is not to close a deal for ATEA because that will only get you that far. Your job as a salesperson is to make the person that you're speaking to in your client company is to make them heroes, because then they will be happy, the company will be happy, and they will get their bonus, which means they will come back to buy more or get more advice from you guys. So, and a very easy way to making someone a hero is say, if they can say to their CFO or CEO or come with a suggestion, I can help us to save 80% or 90% or 60% even on database costs. That is a huge saving, and it's one of the strongest arguments that you can come with. So just, opening with a line like that I can help you most likely to save a lot of money on database licensing, because every company has databases. Question is not if they have it. Question is only how much and which sort. And then a question that Chris came with earlier was like, how do you know if MySQL works for it or not? So I wouldn't try to sell MySQL for SharePoint, for example, because it's Microsoft's product and written for the Microsoft database. So that will be, the presentation that you will get sent to you later, have an extra look at 2 pages, which is what's the difference or the advantages with MySQL Enterprise Edition, because that's the business values or the compliance values, and also the page with the cost savings, and that is actually it's a dump from a web page that you can go to yourself, or the customer can go to themselves and just put in how many databases or core do we have, how many cores, how many servers, and then what database they want to compare between, and boom, you will get a savings estimate based on list price. And then thirdly and last, the page which is the sweet spots for MySQL. Own developed, BI, etc. So if you can get and remember those 3 pages, you have the strongest arguments out there available just at the tip of your tongue.
Thanks, Peter. Any other questions? I can assure you. Yes, go, please.
No, I was going to ask a little bit more about the SMB segment. As most of you know, Stockholm has been known as the European Silicon Valley over the last 5 to 10 years. And we have a lot of startups around our neighborhoods, and we have a lot of new apps and developments going on. Do you see that MySQL, both the community and the standard and the enterprise version, is the #1 database for that market, or do you have a competitor there, and why? Is it a large enough market that it's interesting to reach out to? And your comments on that.
So Adam, yeah. So the small to medium-sized businesses, if we just look at it, I can guarantee you MySQL is the dominant player. Yeah. Especially the community version, because it's free, right? Just think about this for a second. The likes of Uber, Airbnb, Twitter, you name it, when they first started, Facebook, when it first started, these students, they didn't have any money. So they chose a free database as the underlying database for their application. MySQL, it's the most popular. It's the world's #1 database for certainly cloud native applications. It's the most popular database, believe it or not, on AWS RDS. When they talk about even managed databases, they talk about MySQL more than any other database. So absolutely, in the SMB space, MySQL is #1, and you certainly could be talking to the SMB space. The question then goes back to what I said earlier. The data that's being managed on MySQL, what kind of data is it, and what kind of application are they running? If it's mission critical, if you need to comply with regulation, then you've got to ask yourself, are you happy to run at risk? Yeah, well, we have no money. Okay, you have no money. What do you think will happen if you are caught? If the information commissioner comes along and knocks on your door, you can't say you got no money. Then they'll close you down. You will cease trading. Now, you don't drive your car without insurance. You don't have a situation where you don't have home insurance for your home. It's the same sort of thing, where having insurance, having the subscriptions, having the enterprise edition, not only will save you money when you're running the database, but it also helps you to comply with regulations and compliancy. So that's how I would approach that with SMB. But I've got to be honest, and Christian will back me up here, some of the SMB space, if they have no money at all, don't even bother talking to them. You're wasting your time. Talk to the medium-sized businesses rather than the small businesses, or the businesses that can spend a bit of cash. There's no point talking to someone who's bankrupt. They had it. They're too late.
No, I would say it could be of interest to speaking to smaller ones, but not the smallest. Let them start on MySQL community because it's a good database and it works fine. But when you're starting to grow, then you have a heritage and you build something on something, and then it's very likely that you continue with that. So you need to catch them early, so to speak. But one huge selling point, especially in Sverige, which is a country of consensus, we follow the rules and the laws, and GDPR is a very strong point. And Archie, as you said earlier, this is a process thing, almost. Like 90% is about process and how you handle data. 10% is, have you secured the data? How do you store the data? How do you anonymize or hash the data if you're going to use it, depending on how you're using it? And that is something that everyone must comply to. And if you don't have the enterprise version, you're in a heap of trouble. There is other open source tools that can do it, but then all of a sudden you're sitting with like 5 or 6 different tools, which has different update paths and patch dates, and it's starting. If you grow, it's starting to become very hard to handle and manage. So when you come to the point you're starting to store customer data, and you're charging for a service, you pretty much are at the spot where you must pay for a professional product so you can manage your information. And that is where you usually go from a community version to a paid for version, like the enterprise edition. And as Chris said on the chat here, looking at heads of and the directors of development, very interesting. Not only software or license people or procurement. The product developers and the directors are still business driven. And I think having a value discussion with them would be very useful for you guys. If you run into a technical discussion, just be honest and say, I'm a sales guy or sales girl. This is not my strong point. But then just say that I can easily set up a meeting with MySQL, and then it will be with either Archie or me, but most likely together with the Nordic sales consultant or technical sales consultant, Ted Van Mark. You're going to get contact information for him, for me, and for Archie in a mail later, so you know exactly who you can contact. But Ted,
well, what we'll do. Sorry, Peter. What we'll do is actually we'll take the call or the inquiry first.
Yeah.
And then, if necessary, we'll get Ted involved, rather than giving you too many names to go and speak to. Both myself and Peter will manage Ted's time.
I'm fine with either. I think you guys are qualified enough. If you can't answer it internally in ATEA, just contact us and then we'll sort it one way or another. But if a techie wants to have a proper techie discussion, we certainly do have the resources for having that discussion, and we would love to have it.
All right. Archie and Peter, thanks a lot for this. Based on the fact that it's pretty quiet at the moment, I think that the information that you guys have shared has been straightforward enough for them to understand. Also, as Gunilla said on Friday, she will share the slides on their internal portal, and also the contacts for you guys and Ted. So if there aren't any more questions, Chris, do you have any feedback?
No feedback. I thought